Welcome to our home. My name is Stephen Laurie.
And I'm Peggy, Laurie.
And I'm Pastor James. Delighted to be a guest at this table.
I thought you were going to say James Laurie. Because usually this is a family holiday, but of course with special and invited guests. We're here in our home to talk about the sacraments and also the rituals and the traditions of Passover. And those are very different things, the sacraments, the sacred acts, versus what families have incorporated as their essential rituals and those fun traditions. And being in the home is also important too. Passover is always celebrated in the home. It's a home-based ceremony. I mean, even in the time of the magnificent temple and the magnificent priestly class with their magnificent robes and their magnificent power, it was still something where the paschal lamb was sacrificed at the temple, but then the meat went home. And that's where the celebration and the retelling took place. So it's only fitting that we do this around our small table. So we should begin.
Let us begin.
Yeah. We start with the Haggadah. And this is my version of the Haggadah, and we have many others here that our family has used, and other families. There's probably as many Haggadah as there are family traditions. The word Haggadah means telling or retelling, and it sets forth the order of the Passover Seder, plural Haggadot. 85 pages of ritual, 94 pages of ritual. This is the one my family we grew up with was only about 21 pages of ritual, and we've cut ours down to about 10. And that's because families do that, and there's all sorts of these that you can find online. There are Messianic Haggadah, which really speak to how so much of this foretells the coming of Jesus and of course the events of the Last Supper, all the way to Haggadah that specialize with children. I saw today on eBay a baseball Haggadah, where everything was a metaphor about catching fly balls or sacrifice flies. I have no idea. But if it works, the importance is about retelling. So let me actually begin. Seder, the Seder plate. Seder literally means the order. So the Seder is a ritual. It's made up of symbolic foods, blessings, and stories used to remember and to teach. Reading the Haggadah at the Seder table is a fulfillment of a mitzvah. A mitzvah is a commandment, but also a blessing. I'm sure you've heard the term bar mitzvah, which it's that commandment, but also now the child is blessed. To each Jew to teach their children the story from the book of Exodus about the Israelites being delivered from slavery and the exodus from Egypt through the hand of the Lord.
You must explain to your children, I am celebrating what the Lord did for me when I left Egypt.
Exodus mentions again and again the importance of remembering and teaching, such as,
when you come into the land which the Lord will give you as he has promised, you are to keep this ceremony. Now when it happens that your children ask you, what does the ceremony mean to you? You are to say, it is the sacrifice of the Lord's Passover, because he passed over the houses of Israel in Egypt when he struck down the Egyptians, but spared our households. Moses said to the people, remember this day on which you came out from Egypt, out of the house of bondage. And in the future, your children will ask you, what does all this mean? Then you will tell them, with the power of his mighty hand, the Lord brought us out of Egypt, the place of our slavery.
We have before us the Seder plate and the main symbols of Passover. First, we have matzah, commemorating the bread which our ancestors were compelled to eat during their flight from Egypt. Next, we have the shank bone, which reminds us of the Paschal Lamb, a special sacrifice which our ancestors offered at the altar of the great temple in Jerusalem on the Passover holiday. The third symbol is the roasted egg, which reminds us of a second offering brought to the temple. It was also known as the festival offering and serves as a symbol of new life. The fourth symbol is moror, the bitter herbs, in this case horseradish, which is typically used, and reminds us of the bitterness of slavery which our ancestors were forced to endure. The fifth symbol is chrosis, a mixture of apples, nuts, and sweet wine made to resemble mortar, used to remind us of the mortar used to make bricks for the building of Egyptian cities. The final symbol, karpus, the first greens, remind us that Passover coincides with the arrival of spring. In ancient times, the spring harvest was a time for giving thanks for the earth's rich bounties. 4 times during the service we shall partake of wine. The symbol of joy and thanksgiving. The 4 cups are symbolic of the fourfold promise that the Lord made to the Israelites in Egypt. I will redeem you, I will take you, I will bring you forth, I will deliver you. These are the symbols of Passover, echoes of the past and reminders for our present. May we remember the events that they recall and embody their spirit in our daily lives.
I'm going to interrupt the sacraments at this point just to point out the Shabbat or Sabbath candles. If this was occurring on Friday evening after sundown, the most important thing would be the lighting of the Sabbath candles, which the woman of the house would do. Since that's not what's happening this year, we will remove those from the table. And just a word about wine. When I was growing up, all of my relatives originally had migrated from New York City. They were first and second generation or original immigrants from Eastern Europe. And they drank the most hideous wine imaginable. It was either Mogen David or Manischewitz Concord Grape. The modern corollary might be Old Duke. And it was always, it was a joke amongst everyone about why must we suffer with this? Because in the Jewish tradition, wine is not solemn and sacred. It's a symbol of joy. It's a symbol of pleasure, and it should be enjoyed. And so modern Jews now have moved away from the Manischewitz and the Mogen David. Our family tradition for about 20 years now has been a Shiraz Cab blend because we're supposed to enjoy and savor. In some families, the tradition, since it's 4 cups, is to drink 4 cups of wine. And in some it's 5 because there's going to be a 5th cup at the end, Elijah's cup. In some it's just a sip. Since it's mid-afternoon, I think we'll partake of 1 sip at a time, if you don't mind. So I'll ask everyone to raise their glass as we first sanctify this holiday celebration by reciting the Kiddush, which is the blessing for the wine. Baruch atah Adonai, Eloheinu melech haolam, borei peri hagofen. Together.
Blessed art thou, eternal our God, creator of the universe, who has given us the fruits of the vine.
Baruch atah Adonai, Eloheinu melech haolam, shehechianu v'kimanu v'higianu lahazman hazeh.
Blessed art thou, eternal our God, creator of the universe, who has given us life, sustained us, and brought us to this happy season.
And we continue.
The washing of the hands. The second ceremony of the Seder is known as urchatz, washing. We must wash our hands as a symbolic act of purification, not because we are dirty, but because the Seder plate is holy.
And again, with each family and tradition, there are a number of different rituals that can be around hand washing. I've seen whole parades of people going to the kitchen, special goblets used to bless water and pass over people's hands. And the other extreme would be the baby wipes that went around. So,
At a temple.
at a temple, and that was
Nonetheless.
in a basement at a temple, yes. So,
But we have lovely warm washcloths.
Yes,
So
absolutely.
nice touch, absolutely.
and before we begin with the next sacrament, let me talk about the Seder plate. There is some tradition that says you never touch anything on the Seder plate, you never eat anything from the Seder plate. And there are other traditions that say, of course you not only touch these, but you eat these. That's the whole point. And there are rabbis, and there are congregations, and there are families on both sides of that. So knowing that, in our family, we partake of the bounty of the Seder plate. And it's your turn, Pastor.
Wonderful. Eating of the greens. In partaking of the fruit of the earth, we give thanks to the Lord for all its bounties. In tasting the salt water, we are asked to remember the tears that our ancestors shed while suffering the tortures of slavery.
Here we have the salt water, hopefully mixed to the appropriate salinity level. And we'll ask each person to take some of the first greens of the season. Peggy? And dipping the greens in salt water with the blessing, Baruch atah Adonai, Eloheinu melech haolam, borei pari adomo.
Blessed
art thou, eternal our God, creator of the universe, who has given us the fruits of the earth.
Yes, thank you. Many of these blessings aren't unique to Passover. The blessing of fruits of the earth, the blessing of the wine, the blessing of the bread, or the matzah later. In homes, especially homes that keep kosher, you might hear these blessings time and again. So these are not unique, they're just important. We come to the matzah. Behold, this is the bread of affliction which our ancestors ate in the land of Egypt. All who are hungry, come and eat. All who are needy, come and celebrate the Passover with us. With gratitude for the blessings which we have been given, we invite the less fortunate to share with us this meal. May all people, whoever they are, those of them still deprived of freedom, enjoy liberty at this time of year. You can't see it because it's off camera, but we have the door open, and that's a tradition for Passover as well, to really invite people into your homes as well. We won't eat just yet because we have the Passover story, and that must be told. And that story begins with the 4 questions. Ma nishtana halayla hazeh michol halelos. Together.
Why is this night different from all other nights?
The Passover story begins with the reciting of the 4 questions. In the past, it was traditional for the youngest son, who was able to recite or chant or sing these. Today, this responsibility falls to the youngest child. These questions provide the impetus for telling why this night is different from all other nights.
On all other nights, we eat either bread or matzah. But on this night, why do we eat only matzah? On all other nights, we eat many herbs. But tonight, why do we only eat maror? On all other nights, we do not dip our vegetables even once. But tonight, why do we dip them twice? On all other nights, we eat sitting up straight. But tonight, why do we eat reclining?
We have some answers, and then some answers for the answers.
We eat this unleavened bread to remember that our ancestors, in their haste to leave Egypt, could not wait for bread to rise, and so removed them from the ovens while still flat.
We partake of the maror that we might taste some bitterness to remind us of the bitterness of slavery. we dipped twice, greens in salt water, and moror in chorosis, once to replace tears with renewal, and once to sweeten bitterness.
We recline at the Seder table because in ancient times, a person who reclined at a meal on a rug and pillows was a free person, while slaves and servants stood. On this night of Passover, we demonstrate our complete freedom by reclining or sitting comfortably during this meal.
Of course, inquisitive children growing up would always ask that question, well, why aren't we, yeah, that sort of thing. And parents' answer was always, well, what it says there. But in reality, if we were to do this the way it would have been done a long time ago, it would have been probably the living room with all the furniture removed, on the rug with pillows, and we would have been lounging and having the Seder plate on the floor with us, that sort of thing. And I've always said that that would be a wonderful thing to do one of these days, and we've never quite done it. But my father used to say, if you want to put your elbows on the table, or you can get up and wander around, or that sort of thing.
Lean on the person
Yeah.
next to you.
If you wish, and nobody's going to bother you about your table manners, so it works. The story
As
of
Scripture tells us,
Okay.
John fell asleep on Jesus in just
Yes.
the same way.
Yes, and I don't think they
Yeah.
were all sitting at one long
No.
table with 13 chairs lined up.
All on one side.
All
of
on
that
one
table.
side, yeah. Yeah. No. The story of Israel in the land of Egypt. In the land of Canaan, at the time of a great famine, Jacob sent his sons to Egypt to purchase food. They also sought permission from Pharaoh to allow their flocks to graze, for pasture lands in Canaan were barren.
It was not their intention to settle in Egypt, merely to visit and find relief from want. There were but 70 people who arrived in Egypt, but in time their number increased. Soon they grew in strength and became a mighty people.
The Egyptians came to fear them. They reasoned in time of war they might join with an enemy nation. They, therefore, decided to subdue them with forced labor and reduce their number by casting their male children into the river.
The Hebrews were enslaved, whipped and tortured, and forced to make bricks and build great cities for Pharaoh. The task was inhumane and too great to bear.
The people cried out to the Lord, and their cries were heard. The Lord called to Moses, charging him to appear before Pharaoh and to demand that the people be released. Pharaoh was stubborn and would not heed the word of God.
It was then that Moses foretold the punishments that the Almighty would bring upon the Egyptians. Plagues would be visited upon Egypt, and many would perish. Pharaoh defied God and trusted in his own powers. He refused to free the Jewish people.
In consequence, plagues descended upon Egypt with great suffering. Pharaoh, nevertheless, remained stubborn. He would not yield. When the 10th plague was visited upon them, the death of the firstborn sons of Egyptians, a great cry went up throughout Egypt, and Pharaoh finally ordered Moses to take his people out of Egypt.
A full cup of wine is a symbol of complete joy. Though we celebrate the triumph of our people, our happiness cannot be complete so long as others had to be sacrificed for its sake. We shall therefore diminish the wine in our cups as we recall each of the plagues that were visited upon the Egyptians to show our sorrow for their suffering.
There are a number of ways to do this. Our family tradition has always been to hold the wine next to the salt water and to dip our finger and flick the wine into the salt water as we recite each one of the plagues. I will recite them in Hebrew and we will all recite them in English. Dom,
Blood,
Sardea,
Frogs,
Kinin,
vermin,
Arav,
beasts,
Deber,
cattle disease,
Shachin,
boils,
Barad,
hail,
Arba,
locusts,
Hashad,
darkness,
Magas Bararot.
slaying of the firstborn.
Had the eternal our God brought us out of Egypt and not executed judgment against them,
It would have been enough for us.
Had the eternal our God executed judgment against them and not divided the sea for us,
It would have been enough for us.
had the eternal our God divided the sea and not brought us through dry shod,
It would have been enough for us.
had the eternal our God brought us through dry shod and not helped us 40 years in the desert,
It would have been enough for us.
had the eternal our God helped us in the desert 40 years and not given us manna to eat.
It
It
would have been enough for us.
There are many, many songs and many traditions in the Passover Seder, and one of them is what we just recited, or verses from it. It's called Dayenu, which means enough. There are many, 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 many verses to this, but we will just do the first three. It's on the back page there, and if everybody will join in whenever they feel comfortable in Hebrew.
Gotta find it first.
It's in there somewhere. Moment.
Nope.
Go to the beginning.
And then go to the
And go
end.
to the end. Ilu Hotziyanu min Mitzrayim, Hotziyanu min Mitzrayim, Dayenu, 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 Dayenu. Ilu natan lanu et ha-shabbat, latan lanu et ha-shabbat, Dayenu, 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 Dayenu. Ilu natan lanu et ha-Torah, natan lanu et ha-Torah, Dayenu, 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 Dayenu. Our cat has joined us for the Seder. And at that, it's time for the second cup of wine. We'll raise our glass and recite together the blessing in English. Blessed art thou, the eternal our God, creator of the universe, who has given us the fruit of the vine.
There was not time for the dough of our ancestors to become leavened before the eternal our God redeemed them, as it is told in the Bible. And the dough which they had brought out from Egypt they baked into unleavened bread. It had not leavened because they were thrust out of Egypt, and they could not delay.
Baruch atah Adonai, Eloheinu melech haolam, hamotzi lechem min haaretz.
Blessed art thou, eternal our God, creator of the universe, who has brought forth bread from the earth.
Baruch atah Adonai, Eloheinu melech haolam, asher kitshanu b'mitzvotov, v'tzivanu ahilot matzot.
Blessed art thou, eternal our God, creator of the universe, who has made us holy through blessed works, and instructed us concerning the eating of matzah.
One of the traditions at this point is to take the middle matzah and break that in half and wrap that up. And that is going to be saved for the end of the meal, which is called the afikomen, which literally just means the after meal or the dessert. There's all sorts of traditions that arise around this thing, though. One of those is that at some point, some sneaky little child will steal that and hide it and demand a ransom before we can end the Seder. And after everybody's had their dinner and wants to get done with this, they have to come up with something good. There's another tradition in an opposite direction that says some clever adult figures out a way to secrete that off the table and hide it, and then the children have to go scampering and finding it. I like that one better because it kept the children amused for a lot longer, and it also kept them staring at every one of the adults to figure out who was the one that was moving something in and out of the table and where'd they go with it. Got to keep the kids busy.
We will now take the bitter herb and matzah together. These bitter herbs remind us of the bitterness tasted in the years of bondage in Egypt, as it is written. And they embittered their lives with hard labor, with mortar and bricks, with every kind of work in the fields. All the work which they made them do was rigorous.
Preserving a bond with the observance of our ancestors, we follow a practice of Rabbi Hillel from the time when the temple stood. He combined the matzah and maror and ate them, so that he might observe the precept exactly as his father before him. They shall eat the paschal lamb with matzah and maror.
I probably should have let you take as much or as little as you'd like, but I didn't.
He guessed fairly that horseradish is pretty popular at this table, so I think we'll be okay.
Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam, asher kidshanu b'mitzvotov, v'tzivanu ahilat maror.
Blessed art thou, eternal our God, creator of the universe, who has made us holy through blessed works, and instructed us to eat the bitter herbs.
I actually got that one in the back of my throat. And of course, as a child growing up, one of my fondest memories of these bitter herbs was when you got to the point where you could eat as much as your father or your grandfather or that weird uncle that you had who would eat tons of that. It was a rite of passage to be able to say, today I am a man, I ate the bitter herbs. Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Okay, we move on to the next symbol, which is the harosis. The sweetness of harosis represents how God's love can sweeten the bitterness of hardship. It is therefore traditional to eat the matzah, moror, and harosis together. As we recall the suffering in Egypt, we relive the oppression of every generation so that the taste of freedom is sweeter by contrast. May the bitter herb we are about to eat make us sense the pain of cruelty and help us to value the pleasure of freedom.
This is sometimes known as the Hillel sandwich in honor of Rabbi Hillel, who came up with this tradition. It's not really scriptural. And sometimes it's a sandwich because people put another piece of matzah on top. But anyway, it is a nice way to sweeten the bitter herbs. And this is why I run these off, because every year I can make new ones. I should say there is no blessing for this because, again, it's not scriptural, and we've already blessed the food on a number of occasions. We've blessed the matzah, we've blessed the bitter herbs. The charosis is a nice tradition. L'chaim.
L'chaim.
And those are the sacraments prior to the meal. Now, let's talk about the meal. Well, before the meal, let's talk about the matzah. What is this stuff? Did they make this in Egypt thousands of years? Of course not. This is what you call Ashkenazi matzah. This is the matzah that was made in New York around the turn of the century. Because it could get mass produced, it could be done inexpensively, and because it could be done under rabbinical supervision. Rabbis have been saying for hundreds and hundreds of years that the essence of what makes matzah is that it cannot rise. And of course that means you don't put yeast in it, but it also means that there's yeast in the air. And the decision of the rabbis, after much disputation, as only rabbis can do, was that 18 minutes were essential. From the moment water touched the flour until the moment it was done baking could be not a second longer than 18 minutes. And actually, by pressing the dough through rollers, and I don't know if you can see the tiny little pinpricks and holes in this sort of
Perforating it.
perforating, then these things could be mass produced and made. And so those Jews who came from Eastern Europe and settled in the big cities of the East, Boston, New York, Philadelphia, this is what they're used to eating. There's a whole nother Jewish tradition, which is the Sephardic Jews. These are the ones that came from the Middle East. They never were in Poland or the Pale of Settlement, Russia. And their matzah looks very much like even flatter pita bread. Mm-hmm. Longer, but that sort of thing. And they would not be familiar with this. and people with my upbringing may not be familiar with that. And that comes back to this whole idea of what's your family. What do we do for the big festival meal? Chicken,
Lamb.
if you could afford it, brisket. It's really what your mama, your nana, your grandma provided. That was what it was. It could be just about any of those things. But like many traditions, there's many arguments, and the dinner table would be a great, not arguments, debates about what's appropriate. I know people, for instance, who would never eat noodles or rice during Passover. And the argument being that noodles and rice expand, and expanding is like rising. And they didn't make that up. There are rabbis that have said that anything that swells and rises is trife for Passover. And there are others that say, no, it doesn't have yeast, it's not leavened. Mm-hmm. And it's one of those disagreements, if you will, that kept the faith lively, because you could have those conversations at the dinner table, and as long as they didn't become deal breakers between families, as long as we didn't become that sectarian over the issue. And unfortunately, some people have over time. I mean, you see this in the Christian, how the schisms occur for the tiniest act of ritual. This morning, as I was reading through, actually I was looking through Romans, and I found some passage, one of my favorites from Paul, and I don't have a lot of favorites, I'll be honest with you, from Paul. But he was talking to the Romans, and this is what he had to say in chapter 14, starting with verse 5, and then I'll skip to 20 and to 22. If your brother is grieved by what you eat, you are no longer walking in love. Do not, for the sake of food, destroy the work of God. Everything is indeed clean, but it is wrong to make another stumble by what he eats. It is not good to eat meat or drink wine if that causes your brother to stumble. The faith that you have, keep between yourself and God, which I think is a wonderful way of saying that's not what we should be fighting about, worrying about, arguing about. If we care about our brothers, we respect their points of view. So I'm sorry we didn't feed you.
All right.
Yeah.
Though, you at home, if you're watching this on YouTube, you can pause the video, have a lovely meal, and then come back.
Absolutely. I would just say,
after the
I would recommend avoiding ham or bacon.
No pork roast.
Yeah, or bread pudding or any, just to be respectful. I think that would be fine. And once your meal is over, it's time for the blessing after the meal. May it be thy will, our God, to grant us life, to bring us in peace to many more festivals, holy days, and happy celebrations. We shall then offer unto you a new song for our salvation. Blessed art thou, eternal our God, who redeemed Israel.
The Psalm of Praise, which is from the 9th Psalm. I will praise you, O Lord, with all my heart. I will tell of all your wonders. I will be glad and rejoice in you. I will sing praise to your name, O Most High. The Lord reigns forever, establishing judgment, judging the world in righteousness, governing the peoples with justice. The Lord is a refuge for the oppressed, a stronghold in times of trouble. Those who know your name will trust in you, for you, Lord, have never forsaken those who seek you. Sing praises to the Lord, enthroned in Zion. Proclaim among the nations the deeds of the Lord, who does not ignore the cry of the afflicted.
Let's raise our glasses for the third cup. Blessed art thou, eternal our God, creator of the universe, who has given us the fruits of the vine. The final cup is known as Elijah's cup. And part of the tradition of Elijah's cup is to have someone, one of the children, if not, stand guard and open the door to make sure that the spirit of Elijah can come and join us. Some of the tradition is that Elijah will partake of that wine while we're drinking ours. So of course all the little ones afterwards would want to check to see. And if you only had one or two inquisitive little ones and they went to the door, maybe it was your grandpa that took a little sip of that wine. But when I was a youngster, I always swore that that wine was diminished, that Elijah partook of that. So Elijah's cup. As we pray for freedom and peace at this Seder, we invoke the beloved memory of Eliyahu, Elias of God, who today we call Elijah the prophet. Throughout our history, Elijah has been the bearing of good tidings. Elijah's greatest mission shall come when he precedes HaMashiach, the Anointed One, the Messiah, to usher in the long-promised era of peace and freedom for all humanity. We raise our glasses. Eliyahu Hanavi, Eliyahu Hatishbi, Eliyahu, Eliyahu, Eliyahu Hagiladi, Bimhera yavo elenu, Mashiach ben David.
Eliyahu the prophet,
the
sojourner,
the
the
Gileadite,
Gileadite, may he soon come to us
with Mashiach,
the Son of God.
May the All-Merciful send us the prophet Elijah of blessed memory, bearing good tidings of deliverance. Baruch atah Adonai, Eloheinu melech haolam, borei pari hagafen.
Blessed art thou, eternal our God, creator of the universe, who has given us the fruits of the vine.
It is becoming traditional to add one more special goblet to the Seder table. A simple cup of water commemorating the legendary well that followed Miriam the prophetess and the Israelites in the desert, and the way in which she comforted and spiritually supported her people. It also represents women's role in keeping religion alive in the home and passing down Judaism's traditions over the centuries.
We raise our glasses. Zot kos Miriam, kos mayim hayim, zecher letziat Mitzrayim. This
This is the cup of Miriam,
the cup of living waters,
in remembrance of the Exodus from Egypt. From the 6th chapter of the writings of the prophet Micah. With what shall I come before the Lord, and bow myself before God on high? Shall I come before the Lord with burnt offerings, with calves a year old? Will the Lord be pleased with thousands of rams, with 10,000s of rivers of oil? Shall I give my firstborn for my transgression, the fruit of my body for the sin of my soul? He has showed you, O man, what is good. And what does the Lord require of you but to do justice, and to love kindness, and to walk humbly with your God?
May the All-Merciful grant peace to us and for all humankind, and grant us the privilege of reaching the days of Hamashiach and the life of the world to come. Amen.
May slavery give way to freedom. May hate give way to love. May ignorance give way to wisdom. May despair give way to hope. Next year at this time, may everyone, everywhere, be free. Amen.
Thank you.
Pleased with thousands of rams, with 10,000 rivers of oil, shall I give my firstborn for my transgressions, the fruit of my body for the sin of my soul.
We may have to redo that.
Our guest. We have. I see Elijah has arrived.
Let me see if I can.
Cow's a year old or kitten's a year old?
Hey, you. Guess what?